It was raining, the kind of rain that felt like shards of glass on your skin, sharp and cold, soaking through the layers of my coat in seconds. My small hands gripped the suitcase handle so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The station was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights flickering as if they, too, were unsure whether to stay on. I was 12 years old. My parents, my so-called guardians, had pulled me out of the car, laughed and said, "Let's see how she finds her way home." Then they drove off, leaving me staring at the back of a taxi that carried away what little security I had ever felt. The first moment I realized the depth of their cruelty, my chest tightened. My heart pounded, and the tears wouldn't come. I felt shock before grief, the kind of numbness that makes you feel invisible. Around me, shadows moved. An old man dragging a broken suitcase, a mother shushing her child, a man in a soaked trench coat muttering into his phone. But none of them noticed me. None of them cared. I remember thinking, this must be a dream. Any second now, they'll come back and laugh, saying it's just a joke. But they didn't. And the rain kept falling. My legs trembled, my suitcase heavy in the wet asphalt, and every step toward the station exit felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I tried to call them. I dialed their numbers again and again. No answer, the phone said coldly, mechanically. My mother's voice, the one I had trusted to comfort me even in the darkest nights, was gone. The first scream I let out, a sound more animal than human, was muffled by the rain, but it came anyway. It echoed across the empty platforms, bouncing back at me from the walls of the station, and I felt both lonely and strangely alive. Hours blurred into a relentless sequence of people walking past me, none of them stopping, none of them noticing. By evening, I had wandered onto a bench, shivering and numb. I had no money, no idea of the city, and no one to ask for help. Hunger clawed at my stomach, and I realized that the joke my parents had called fun was now my life, or at least the beginning of it. That night, I slept in the shadow of a closed kiosk, using my suitcase as a pillow. When I woke up, the city felt more terrifying than the night before. But somewhere inside me, something else had begun, a small, fierce flame. If my parents wanted me to survive this joke, then survive I would. I decided then that nothing, not the streets, not strangers, not their laughter, would break me again. The next day, I scavenged a little courage and found a public payphone. I called the police, but in a city where I was a lost child with no ID, no address, and no adults who cared, I was just another number in their day. Eventually, a kind woman in a nearby bakery noticed me, offered me a warm bun and hot tea, and listened as I told my story through hiccups and tears. She didn't judge. She didn't laugh. For the first time that week, I felt a sliver of hope. She helped me get to a shelter, a cold, gray building that smelled like bleach and sadness. Other kids huddled in corners, whispering, crying. I realized that every single one of us had been abandoned in some way. I was not alone. Not really. It was there in that shelter that I made my first vow of revenge. Not against the world, but against those who had laughed at my helplessness. My parents had believed they could break me with a cruel joke. They had underestimated what it meant to survive. They had underestimated me. But the shelter wasn't safe forever. I was 12, scared, and suddenly aware that the streets and the world beyond were waiting. There were whispers of foster families, strange men with clipboards asking invasive questions, and I realized that even in supposed safety, I was still a prisoner of circumstance. I had to leave. I had to find a way out. Of the shelter, out of my parents' shadow, and eventually, out of the city that had swallowed my childhood. By the time I turned 13, I was working small jobs, washing dishes, delivering newspapers, anything that kept food in my stomach and a thread of independence in my hands. Every day, the memory of the train station, of that cold, mocking laughter, fueled me. By 15, I had learned the streets, learned survival, and learned that nothing in life was free. And then one evening I saw him, my father, not far from a crowded subway station, laughing with a woman I had never met, completely unaware of the hurricane he had left behind. I froze, every memory flooding back, the rain, the fear, the loneliness. And for the first time I realized that my revenge would not be petty. It would be calculated, slow, and devastating. But as I stepped forward, ready to confront him, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned, and it was a man I had never met, a stranger who looked concerned, almost familiar. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but curious. I didn't know if I could trust him. But something in his eyes, an understanding, a recognition of pain, made me hesitate. And in that moment, I realized that my journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about finding allies, discovering strength I didn't know I had, and reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me. And just like that, the rain returned, heavier this time, drenching the city and blurring the edges of the moment. I didn't know then that the stranger would become the key to a chapter one had never imagined. A chapter that would test everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and betrayal. Years passed. I moved cities, learned jobs, learned people, and learned the art of hiding my anger behind a calm, professional facade. By the time I was 25, I was working as an executive assistant at a marketing firm, sharp, efficient, and quietly intimidating to anyone who underestimated me. But no matter the accolades or promotions, the memory of that train station, of the betrayal, never left. Life had a cruel way of mirroring the past. My first serious relationship, one that I thought could be safe, ended with a betrayal so deep that it reopened scars I had long convinced myself were healed. My partner had been manipulating me for years, using the very vulnerabilities I had sworn never to expose. I was angry, furious, but also smart enough to recognize that anger could be weaponized. And weaponized I did. I started plotting, not to hurt anyone indiscriminately, but to reclaim control over the narrative of my life. Every step was careful, deliberate. Every relationship I nurtured was analyzed for loyalty. Every job opportunity was a chess move. And slowly I began to see the patterns, the people who pretended to care, the ones who had a hidden agenda. Then came the unexpected twist. My mother reached out. Her email was polite, distant but unmistakable. "We'd like to see you. It's been a long time. Let's meet." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to laugh, the part that remembered 12-year-old me, frozen and wet on that platform. Part of me wanted to scream, throw the laptop across the room. But another part, curious, dangerous, willing to play the game on my terms, typed back. "When and where?" Meeting them was surreal. They looked older, softer, but the same eyes, the ones that had watched me struggle, alone, without guilt, stared back at me. They tried to explain, to apologize, to paint their cruelty as a lesson. I laughed. I laughed until my stomach ached. "A lesson," I whispered, and then louder. "You left me at a train station alone and called it a joke. That's a lesson." My mother faltered. My father, once smug and confident, looked small. I realized, with a chill I hadn't felt since childhood, that they had finally seen the consequences of their actions. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. I was ready to test them, to see if they truly understood what they had done. And then, my mother dropped a bombshell. We've been trying to reach you all these years. We didn't know how to fix it. But there's someone you need to know. Someone who is connected to you." My mind froze. Someone connected to me. I had spent years thinking I knew the boundaries of my life. I had learned that trust was a weapon and betrayal a tool. And now they were suggesting that I had a hidden connection, a secret that had been buried like a time bomb, waiting to explode. Before I could ask, my father added, She's here. Waiting for you." I felt my heart lurch. Another test. Another cruel trick. Or was it real? I stepped into the car, silent, tense, and my stomach churned with dread and curiosity. The city blurred past, rain hitting the windshield as if echoing the storm inside me. When we arrived, I saw her. A young woman, not much younger than me, sitting on the porch of a small, cozy house. She looked up, and the resemblance hit me like a freight train. My mother's eyes, my father's chin, and yet, hers was a life I had never lived. "She's my sister," I whispered, barely audible. "Yes," my mother said. "Your half-sister. You never knew about her." The world tilted. My life, already built on betrayal and survival, suddenly had new pieces I didn't know existed. My sister, my parents' secret, the unknown life I might have had. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and maddening. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But deep down, a flicker of something I had long buried began to grow. Curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, a chance for redemption, for connection, for family I thought I'd lost forever. But as I reached for the door, a car screeched down the road. A man jumped out, tall, broad, face shadowed under the streetlights, and I felt my breath catch. His eyes were sharp, dangerous. And he knew me. Who was he? And why was he here now? I froze as the man stepped closer. Every instinct I had honed on the streets, every lesson learned in betrayal and survival, screamed at me to run. But my sister, sitting behind the screen door, looked at me with wide eyes, uncertain but trusting. "You need to leave," I whispered. "Now." But he only smiled, cold and calculating. "I don't think so," he said, his voice low. "You've been running your whole life. But running doesn't make you safe." And then it clicked. He wasn't here by accident. He knew my past. He knew my parents. And somewhere deep inside, I realized he had been waiting for this moment too. Perhaps to settle his own score, or perhaps to control me. The next hours blurred into chaos. Words were exchanged, threats made, and I felt the old surge of fear, the same as when I had been 12, left alone on a train platform. But this time I wasn't a helpless child. I was a woman who had learned to fight, who had learned to manipulate situations in her favor. I called every connection I had, using every trick I had learned. Within hours the man was surrounded, forced to retreat, and I stood there, trembling but victorious. My sister ran into my arms, and I realized that the family I had been denied was finally here. Not perfect, but ours. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life. I confronted my parents not with tears or anger, but with calculated truth. That their cruelty had shaped me, yes, but it had not destroyed me. I had survived, and more than that, I had thrived. I had turned betrayal into strength, abandonment into purpose. And for the first time I allowed myself to believe that life could be more than survival. It could be about love, about connection, about building something real from the ruins they had left behind. As I stood on a new train platform years later, watching my sister board a train for college, I felt the wind on my face and remembered that 12-year-old girl, cold, wet, and alone. She was still inside me, yes, but stronger, braver, unbreakable. I smiled, knowing that the joke my parents had tried to play had backfired. I had found my way home, not to them but to myself. And in that moment I knew. Nothing in life, not betrayal, not abandonment, not heartbreak, could ever stop me from rising. The train left, carrying my sister toward her dreams, and I whispered to the wind, "I am not lost. I'm home."